Hello, I'm Rabbi Spivak, and welcome to Ask Rabbi Spivak, a program that discusses questions and answers on Jewish law and tradition. Today's question comes from Savannah, Georgia, and it says, Dear Rabbi Spivak, I understand that the way we do marriages today is, under Jewish law is not as the same exactly as in the old days. Could you please explain? Well, you're right. Although all the basics are there, and the requirements are there, the form of Jewish marriage that we know today was not the same as the form of 1,000 years ago. And those of you who have been to a Jewish wedding well remember there's the chuppah today, and there's a bride and groom with a ring and the blessings and the wine. And those things existed then too, but in a different manner. You see, what we do today is we have the marriage complete underneath the chuppah. Then it was in two parts, a year apart. First there was the Arison, which also became known as Kedushin. Arison is the betrothal. Betrothal means those that the bride is no longer free to marry whoever she wants. She is reserved for the groom and is considered a married woman in almost every way, except for the fact that she and her husband at that time are yet to be allowed to be with each other privately. That is Arison, sort of a reservation before the actual consummation of the marriage, which is a year later. And why did they do that? They did that because in those days there were no overnight shipping and no communications. And when a young lady went from the marriage or from her home with her parents to her husband, it took a year sometimes to get all the furniture that had and materials that had to be done from scratch. It took a long time. So they decided to make a year apart from those things. Now, what happened in the time of the Arison? The Arison Kedushin was when the groom gave the bride a ring, and he recited the particular words, and at that time she became his in terms of the future, but not for the moment. And what is going on is a very interesting thing here. Why did they do it that way? Because of preparation and necessity. A year apart was needed. We look at this as strange, say, what's going on here? But if you lived at that time, you would very well understand it. And why did the rabbis change that and make it all at one time underneath the chuppah, the way we see it? There's a good reason, because they felt that a woman who was not allowed to be with her husband for a year at that time, was vulnerable, had all the vulnerabilities of a married woman in terms of transgressions. So therefore, they said, let's make it together, so that vulnerability to transgressions does not exist. Hence, we have it all underneath the chuppah, and that's what you see. That used to take a year apart. Now, when we look at this, we see the following. Under the chuppah, you will see the groom give the bride a ring and recite the words of marriage, and after that, you will hear the reading of the Tsuba, the marriage contract. The Tsuba actually divides between the Arison and the Suyin. It is a division point. And it talks about the husband's responsibility to the wife, and what the wife also brings to the marriage. But essentially, it is a document describing the husband's responsibilities, that he has to earn a living for his wife, and he has to respect her and provide for her. And this is still under Jewish law this way, no matter what you may think or see differently than that. But that is the Jewish law concerning that. Then after the Tsuba comes in the Suyim. The Nisuyin is the Birchos Nisuyin, the blessings, the Sheva Brachas, underneath the chuppah. These Sheva Brachas, these 7 blessings are said usually 7 different people, sometimes not necessarily so. It can be one person can say 2 or 3 or whatever the situation requires. But after the blessings, the groom crushes the cup in remembrance of the Churban Beis Hamikdash, the destruction of the temple, and then the bride and groom leave the chuppah. At this time, the marriage consummation or the full relationship does not exist yet. And here we have an interesting argument between a difference, I should say, between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic Jews do not see it the same way. Ashkenazi Jews will go to a yichud room, and there in the yichud room there will be witnesses outside, and the bride and groom will be in a room alone for a certain amount of time, and that's called the Gemar Kinyan, the Gemar Nisuyin, and the marriage is consummated by them being in a room alone at that time. The Sephardim don't do it that way. The Sephardim say as long as they go home and live and stay in a home in a room together, that's the consummation. No need for doing that at the time of the wedding, and no need to doing it with witnesses at that time. That's the difference between Ashkenazic and Sephardic in the wedding that's concerned. There are some interesting things that you should know. Number one, that we don't. There was a time in our history in which the Jewish people, the rabbis, do not permit a man to allow his daughter, underage daughter, to be married off. They didn't allow it. But if you look in those of you who want a source, it's the Tosfos and Kedushin Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, Kedushin 41a, and Tosfos brings that even though the general custom was that a father didn't marry off his daughter under a certain age, if you call the Ketana, under the age under a certain age, but they did allow it in certain times. They did allow it. Why? Because of the fact, and this is a little piece of history, the fact that it was the responsibility of the bride to bring a certain amount of money and support into the wedding. It's called a nadin, a dowry in today's terminology. And so the husband wanted, or the father wanted to make sure that his daughter had a dowry, that she would have something to bring to the marriage that would ensure her getting married. And so the Tosfos lived in 12th century France and Germany area. And you know from history what was going on there. That was the time of the Crusades, the time of the pogroms, where Jews were slaughtered on wholesale. And that's from where we get the Avarachamim prayer. And so the sages allowed a father to marry off his daughter, or at least the Arison part, the betrothal, not the consummation. That betrothal part was allowed even when she was underage, because of the fact that they said, the father said, maybe I won't have money tomorrow. Maybe the pogroms or the crusades will come and kill me, wipe me out, and my daughter will never have a chance to have enough money to bring into a marriage to make the marriage work. So I am at least doing the Arison part. I'm doing the part where she's reserved for her husband. And one last thing you should know about what we said about this. If those of you who have been to 47th Street in Manhattan, or see in general, will notice that there are a lot of Jews in the diamond business. Why are Jews in the diamond business more than seems any other profession? Has to do with the Crusades and the pogroms and all the things throughout history, that the Jews were driven out of one land, and if they own real estate, that was a terrible situation because they couldn't take it with them, and they were with nothing. Diamonds became the perfect perfect profession for the Jews, because if he was exiled from a country because he was a Jew, he could take his money, his business with him in his pocket. Terrible way to get into a profession, but a necessary way for survival. So we hope you've had a little insight into Jewish weddings then and now. Of course, you should learn on your own, and really you'll expand your knowledge far more than what you hear here, but we're glad to give you a little of it. And so Rabbi Yaakov Spivak saying, until we meet again, Seid gesund lehitraod, Shalom al Yisrael, and most of all, my friend, Chazak.